Welcome. This is Born to Flourish, and I'm Anna Klint, transformational healer and coach. And I am so excited to have with me today Jessica Graham. She is a meditation teacher. She is a grief and trauma resolution guide. She's a couples coach. She's a speaker. She's an author. She wrote Good Sex. And like me, she is also a creative. Unlike me, however, award-winning actor and filmmaker. But I'm so excited to have you here, Jessica. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Anna. It's great to be here.
Awesome. It's so wonderful. I'm so thrilled for what we're going to talk about, which is mindful awakening, which I know you know just a thing or two about from personal and professional experience. And
Yes.
so I love, and I'm so intrigued by and curious about how, like, all the myriad ways that spirit is using to wake us humans up. And so can you tell us about what your journey to waking up was like, has been like, is ongoingly like?
Right, exactly. Yes, yes. Yes. So I was a pretty like spiritually sensitive little kid. And my mom taught me to meditate. She taught me some different meditations when I was a kid, and I was really into them. But I also grew up in a home of alcoholism and neglect and abuse and lots of love and lots of magic, but it was, definitely a combo.
Yeah.
And so I got really far away from that part of myself for the most part, because I needed to kind of close down and shut off and unplug from something bigger, because it was too painful to feel that much. And so what I would find is, over the years as a teenager and as a young adult, I would every so often find myself, whether it was in nature or I just stumbled into a random church and sat there in an empty church, or just some interesting moment that occurred out of nowhere where there would be this deep connection. And then I would forget. I would, as we do, and then fall away, and I'd kind of be back in my suffering, and the suffering could be the lows, but it could also be the highs. It's just like this extreme way of being human. And so when I was about 27, I got sober and kind of stopped using that as a way to shut down.
Yeah.
And it was pretty shortly after that I met my now dear friend, Michael Taft, and he introduced me to Shinzen Young's system of meditation. And it just clicked. I was taught how to observe and deconstruct and get very curious about the mental images, mental talk, and emotional sensations that made up a self.
Yeah.
And it was just like the right time, right teachings. And it clicked in such a way where within a few months, maybe for some people, but not for me. Within a few months, there was this massive paradigm shift. And I liken it to being unplugged from the matrix. And it was, it was amazing to have such a different reality. And I think I definitely had a sense of like, oh, everything's just going to be great forever. Like, I'm just
yay!
I'm done. Yeah,
definitely.
Like this low dose of Xanax and LSD all the time.
Definitely.
Because, for me, it was definitely like, it was very flashy in the beginning. It was like lots of peak experiences and all of that. And so that's not what happened. Life kept happening. I was humbled again and again by what it is to be human and all that comes with that. And it's been this slow and beautiful journey since then. And definitely there is a demarcation line between how I experienced reality before that period and how I experienced reality after. But since then, there's just been, as you said, endless unfoldings. And definitely ups and downs in that process.
As you're talking, I was thinking about, and I love like how you mentioned like pre-awakening, this idea about the, you know, how the highs can be suffering and, you know, can induce suffering, as well as the lows that, you know, that we go through in our human journey. And in some ways, like, I'm curious about like those peak experiences too, because like sometimes when we have these peak experiences and we're just like, let this be what it is forever. There is this thing of it being sometimes too much and excruciating, and also, but then also like the down, like coming down from it back down to the earth and down to being human again in some ways is also can be somewhat discouraging sometimes, let's say, or it can just be like you said, I like that word, it's like it's kind of humbling. And so as you're talking, I'm thinking about these two things, like the ways, you know, prior where we used to go, you know, yes, you know, those highs and then these other highs in a different way. What do you have to say about that? I'm curious. Or what does that elicit in you?
Yeah. For me personally, I think being a human with this brain and this body, right? Someone who has complex PTSD, somebody who's neurodivergent, somebody who has lived with one kind of chronic pain or another for many years. Extremes, I kind of needed extremes. Like that's what I recognized as normal.
Yes.
Right.
Familiar.
Like, familiar. And it's also what helped me to feel more present, because I'm like, okay, I'm in it. Here we are. It's happening. Like,
right, I'm alive.
Yeah, I'm alive.
Yeah.
And it's so different today. Like life is so simple, so simple. And when there are those kind of what I think of as nature expressing, right? Like when I have those days where there's like a lot of emotion or there's some version of suffering, I feel like I'm a volcano or a tree toppling or like a wild river. And it doesn't feel so much like this personal experience. It feels more like this natural flow, but that's not very often these days. And I certainly don't need that experience in order to feel alive. Like life is just so alive. But that's also what kept me meditating in the beginning. And to be honest, it's like,
oh yeah,
right. Like I got the feedback that I was good at it, which was very helpful for this recovering perfectionist who's like seeking approval from father and mother figures. Right?
I don't know anything about that. Nothing.
Oh, I'm sure. And then it was also like exciting. Like I'm someone who used a lot of drugs and alcohol, and so give me these experiences that are, really beyond any drug experiences I had. And I'm like, yes, give me more.
Yeah.
And so like, that's personally kind of why I think I was wired to be drawn to that. I think in general, people are looking for experiences. We're looking for life and for spiritual awakening to be something really special.
Yeah.
And really, really personal.
Yeah.
And the thing is that it's kind of not.
I know.
Right? Like not in the way that we think.
Totally. It's like, but don't tell everyone that, because they're not going to want to show up for the journey. You mean it isn't an amusement park at the end? And it's like, actually, no, it's not really.
No.
We want it to be sometimes, but yes.
Well, yeah. I will say it's very weird. Like it's definitely weird. And I would say it gets weirder. Do you agree? Like it just gets weirder and weirder?
It's totally absurd. It's completely absurd. Yeah, I think it just gets weirder and weirder. I'm totally with you. I'm so glad we can laugh about this.
Me too. Isn't it nice? It's like that kind of that connection to be able to like, we both have our own expression of what this is, but to be able to totally understand, like, yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh, this is so great. Okay. Yeah. And I totally get that. Like that thing in the beginning with meditation, like for me, when I really started in earnest, not just like a little here, a little there, it was like my crisis level was so extreme, and my emotional pain level was so extreme that it was literally the only slice of peace that I had in my day. But that was what I needed so that I could keep going. And then it was like, you've got to get through that period so that you can break through into that, where it bleeds into like all the aspects of your day. And I'm getting unstable connection. So hopefully, fingers crossed, we can maintain, but let me know if it craps out, because sometimes we blow the energy out. But yeah, like I totally get that, what you're saying. So, so you offered up something, you teased me with this thing about what the side effects of your spiritual practice and awakening have been. And I was like, ooh, yeah, let's talk about side effects.
Yeah. Yeah. So look, obviously there's lots and lots and lots of great side effects. We know this from our direct experience. We know this from watching other people that we support, or, friends. We know this from many years of history that's documented. We know this from science now. Lots of scientific, studies showing that there are great side effects of meditation. So we know that. What we don't tend to talk about so much is, it's happening more, but are the negative side effects of this whole thing that ultimately don't have to be negative, right? Ultimately. But there can be times when it very much seems that way. So I remember early on in my practice, someone said to me, there are people who meditate a lot who are sensitive to everything. Everything. They become hyper sensitized to everything, which, which is why often at retreat centers, they'll be fragrance free. There'll be a lot, around the food and around, it's just, there's a lot of kind of taking care of that sensitivity, which I'm glad, because I do have sensitivities. But we can, so as meditators, we can become super sensitive to everything, or we can become like totally okay with everything.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say I'm all the way there, but I'm definitely not living in the sensitive to the point of like ongoing suffering all the time.
Right.
So I think that can be one side effect, is we can just become so sensitive to everything. And that can exhibit for some people as fibromyalgia, I've seen. It can exhibit as strong allergies, different kinds. Yeah. All kinds of stuff.
Totally.
And I'm not a doctor. I'm not, I'm not a scientist, but it seems that happens. And definitely for me, the energetic nature of all of this stuff has been a doozy for this body. So I've been working with various kinds of pain and illness since I was a kid, and that's true, and that's part of trauma.
Absolutely.
But the kind of Kundalini awakening experience that can sometimes come with all of this, it can really wreak havoc on your body. And and if you don't know what's happening, if you don't know, that can be really scary, and you can go on a lot of wild goose chases. I think that's the saying. Looking for, what's wrong with me. Right. When really it's just like this nervous system responding to this like radical shift in perception. Is what it seems like to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I've totally seen that in myself and in clients and people that I talk to. And it does really feel like, and this is just a totally biased perception, completely 100%, but it does really feel like there is this increase in general sensitivity as, humanity is waking up. Like just more and more people are having these nervous system issues, hormonal imbalances, food sensitivities, all of these things as they are becoming more sensitive beings. As that is part of it, is this sensitization that you talk about. I love that you bring that forward. And it's so fascinating to me too, like just how many women, and I work mostly with women, so I'm not discounting any male experience whatsoever. It's just like, that's just not, I don't get as much input there and feedback there, but just how many women really are like have these physical issues that are wrapped up into their spiritual healing journey. And just, it's really fascinating. It's totally fascinating to me.
It really is. I find it fascinating as well. And I do see it with men also, but I see it more with women. Obviously people of any gender could have these experiences, but it does seem to happen a lot with women. And I'm really interested as a teacher, like how to mitigate some of this stuff.
Yeah.
I haven't figured out exactly how to do that with the physical. I know lots of tools to help people work with it, and, lots of, suggestions for how to move through it or come to peace with it.
Yeah.
What I have become very passionate about working with others on is the classic dark night of the soul, or pit of the void,
Yes.
kind of experience, or spiritual crisis or emergency, because I thought I had gone through that years ago. I was like, oh, that's what this is. Oh, wow, this is hard. I had no idea. And I had no idea, like a number of I have no sense of time these days, but a number of years ago, I was launched into it for real. And it was, I've had lots of pain and suffering and tragedy and all that in my life, but I've never had an experience like that before. And talk about being humbled, being tenderized, being actually really truly for long periods questioning my sanity. Now that's happened in little doses here and there with certain peak states, but this was ongoing. And for me, and I'll just put a trigger warning out there around suicide, I every day wanted to kill myself, every day. And it wasn't until a teacher that I trusted, it wasn't until Shinzen, I got on the phone with him. I was like, oh, I've been like this for a year. He's like, well, it's dark night. And I was like, oh. Like, because part of how it manifested for me was like isolating. Like nobody was helping me. Like I was so on my own.
Totally.
And when he said that, it was the beginning of a very slow process of coming out of it. And it's like, I wouldn't take it back. I wouldn't take it back, but I would also want to support people in having, if that needs to happen, it doesn't need to happen for everyone on this path, but if it needs to happen, to support them in moving through it as swiftly as possible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's like, as I'm hearing that story, I'm just saying, oh my God, thank God you had someone to talk to, during that time. And then I was also like, yeah, that happened to me too, but it wasn't a whole year. And I was like, oh my God, a whole year. I don't think I would have made it. I don't think I would have made it. But that's the power also of spirit too. It's like, there's some other alchemical kind of thing happening there sometimes for some of us. Obviously, there are so many reasons why people choose to end their life, and it isn't necessarily a dark night of the soul like what you're describing. And so we're holding the, like a big open space here for a lot of different, perspectives and experiences. But my sense, having gone through something similar, is just that there was a form of energetic support that kept you from actually pulling the plug at that time. And there was a purpose for the whole experience. And, the obvious thing is like, so that you could help people through the same experience, that's the obvious part. But I think there are other, things that each one of us has to go through, or perhaps we signed up to be our, our experience to get us, moving along this, this ascension pathway. And I just really honor you for sharing that story with us, and just for what you went through. My God, a year of every day.
Thank you.
Wanting it to be over is intense.
It was intense. And I do find great meaning in that whole experience now. And I certainly, at the time, I didn't assume it was spiritual. And I got lots of mental health help, and I, tried medication, and like I took it seriously. But I will also say this, because of the mindfulness part of mindful awakening, I didn't believe any of the thoughts.
Right.
I never for a second believed them, because the part of me, well, yeah, I never believed them, because I wouldn't be here if I did, honestly.
That's right.
It's like there was enough of a sense of, I am not a solid fixed self that is suffering. I am everything. And so I think having multiple tools when you're on a path of awakening is so important. You know, I also did lots of trauma work during that time, because many times for people, maybe all the time, I don't know, but a lot of time, the things like dark night, or like painful, scary peak states, can very often be tangled up with trauma. And so for me, it was like a pre-birth trauma that I was working with at that time, and you know, and like kind of baby, infant, and then into pre-birth. And I was working with like really powerful facilitators who helped me. And after Shinzen gave me that information, I started really things started actively changing. But I will say, it was probably about 9 months into this experience that I made the decision to stop thinking the thought of, I want to kill myself, because I could stop the thought. And almost never is that the suggestion in meditation. It's almost never like, stop that. But
that's right.
I was like, with this, I've been thinking this for 9 months. I'm in massive amounts of pain. This is not helping me. I have the ability to turn this thought off. So I did. And, you know, and when this was over, it was over. You know, it's like, I also see that sort of annihilation, that sort of deep emptiness, as on the flip side, birth, life, and home. And so I look back at that experience now, and it's like, I was being shown something that I just wasn't able to see it at that time. And the only way that I could come to terms with what was being experienced was to take it to the suicidality. Oftentimes for people, it can be thinking that they're going to die, like that they're sick, or they're going to be hurt. And, you know, it can go different ways. But I think it's like, ultimately, when you've come out the other side of it, it's very clear to see that that's not what it is at all.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's so true. This idea that like in most meditation practices, you're just like, just observe your thoughts. It's like, but wait, we have free will, and we have, you know, this amazing brain capacity, this prefrontal cortex that can say, stop that thought. That thought is not loving to me. That thought is not perpetuating health in my body and my vessel. It's not serving my growth. It's not serving my family, my community, my anything. Like, stop the thought. And, you know, to be able to get to the point, like, that's actually really profound, that you were in such a state of what feels like despair and confusion and pain and all of these things, and that yet you could still find that presence of mind to say, I'm gonna practice stopping this thought that I've been thinking every day for the last like 270 days or whatever. It's intense.
And that's just the practice, right? As you know, it's like when you practice and you practice and you practice, and then sometimes you don't know why you're sitting there on the meditation cushion, and then life happens, and you're like, oh, right.
Totally.
This is what all the practice is for.
Totally. Put me in, coach. Oh no, I don't want to go in. I don't want to go in. I'm fine on the mat. Just put me on the cushion. I'm good on the cushion. Yeah, totally. Oh my gosh. This has been such a great conversation. I feel like I could just talk to you for hours and hours, and we could go down some really interesting rabbit holes. Is there anything else that I want to ask you about awakening? So just to be clear, it sounds like your dark night of the soul came after you were already deep into mindfulness practices, and like you had been meditating, and because that's what you said. I thought I had gone through this, but then I didn't really know. And that was one of the humbling moments, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I had, I was teaching. I mean, this wasn't
Mhm.
all that long ago. Like life was very much in session, and
Yeah.
um, I had I had experienced a lot of the sort of classical path, and I
Mhm.
don't follow maps. So I think according to certain maps, my development is all out of whack. Like I think it's all kind of out of whack, but that's me for you. I'm kind of, I tend to not do things by the book. But yeah, it was definitely a considerable way into my journey. And the thing is now though, is like, I look at my time on this path in earnest, and it's like, I'm just like, oh, I know nothing. I know
Totally.
nothing,
Totally.
I really ultimately know nothing.
Totally. I hope your clients aren't listening right now.
I will tell them. I mean, when
I'm
it comes
teasing.
to this, right? Like when it comes to
Totally.
this stuff, like I certainly have opinions. I certainly have
Yes.
ideas.
Yeah.
I try not to have beliefs, but I have my sense of things. But when it really comes to the I want to say deeper aspects of the path, but that's not really right. When it comes into the places where it's actually hard to put into words,
Yeah.
that as spiritual teachers, we try, and some
Mhm.
of us,
Mhm.
do it really well. Some of us don't. I think sometimes I do, sometimes I don't.
Yeah.
In that territory, it is a constantly changing dynamic activity.
Mhm.
So there's no way to say like this is the truth, and this in my view, in my opinion, this is the truth and this is it.
Absolutely.
And I know because more and more I'm just like, how could we know?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It really is ineffable.
Hmm.
And it really is, I mean, in some ways, like that's some of the absurdity of it is like it's like the more we wake up, it seems like everything should be clearer and this truth, this capital T truth should become self-evident in some way. And it's like, actually, I don't really know that that's what's happening right now. And it's just
Uh-huh.
like, and so here we are like moving through our experiences, each in our own kind of homemade reality, and all of us determining what that truth actually is for our individual selves. And it's really, it becomes quite interesting as you're teaching teaching people.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I would also say that, my experience has been that the self that needs to know, the self
Hmm.
that needs it
Yeah.
to make sense falls away.
Yeah.
And that's where it starts to get really fun. And by it, I
Yeah.
mean like existence starts to get really fun, because it's like there's not that like constant like um what is it called? It's terror manage no, it's there, it's most people are constantly contending with the fear of death, right? And it's
Uh-huh.
influencing everything all the time in some
Yeah.
really interesting ways. There's some cool science around it. And when that's no longer the thing that's driving the car all the time, like the car gets to like fly and become a submarine and like be a time machine and like
Yeah.
gets to do all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
So
Totally. 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 Well, gosh, I'm just thinking about all of the people who, you know, as humanity is waking up more and more, I'm really thinking and feeling and holding space for all of these people who are going to be going through things like what you describe, and or who are, doing it through these health crises, for instance, and just want to just say, I hope this message finds you, and I hope that you can find someone to talk to, because I don't think that we were meant to do this alone. I think it's actually really excruciating to do it alone, and that there are people out there, not just Jessica and me, but lots of people who would want to hear you, see you, witness you, and just know that it can feel like you're losing your mind or you're losing your body or both. And it's kind of just part of what this waking up process is. So thank you so much, Jessica. I hope we'll actually have another opportunity to do maybe another round of this sometime. This is super fun for me. I've really enjoyed every moment of it. Thank you.
me too. What a pleasure. And yes, anytime. I'm in.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, we will say goodbye for now. And I'll catch you on the flip side.
All right. Take